Hello, and welcome to Wednesday in Westeros preview season 7.
Yeah,
we've previewed it. I'm Todd A.
I'm Taylor Trask. Hey,
we have previewed it. We have done a fan theories episode with our friends Emily and Peter of the Fan Theories podcast. We've done a crossover event, so this is we might have one more preview before season 7 actually starts, but this is one of those previews. We're going to talk about some other stuff. How's it going, Taylor?
That's right. It's good. Well, this has got to be the last preview because isn't it next week? Aren't we on next week?
No.
Or there's one more week. Oh, shoot.
One more Sunday. So we could conceivably do one more preview and then do a Sunday. I don't think we're going to get a lot of news. So, and
not between now and then, at least.
Yeah, I'll hit the ground running with it. With what I kind of hinted to you. You hadn't seen some of this stuff. So, Con of Thrones was this past weekend. Neither of us attended, sadly. Although strangely, it was held in the town where you and I met in Nashville, Tennessee.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Opryland Hotel or whatever.
Wow. Why there? I wonder.
I don't know, but what a savvy. I don't like the idea that there's like a Wizard World Comic Con in Nashville. It doesn't make any sense to me when Dragon Con is down the street in Atlanta, basically. And Nashville's not a big geek city. It's got like 2 comic book shops, but
and ones that aren't really up to par, as we've discussed before. Like it's not like it's like they're the greatest comic shops in the world.
Yeah.
It's like,
well, yeah, there's one we're talking about in particular you and I have in mind, but there is another one that I think is really excellent there. It's just a little bit out of town, and if I can remember the name, I would definitely buzz market them, but I can't remember the name right now. But anyway, I do like it as a destination for a Con of Thrones kind of thing, because there's no city that's like the Game of Thrones city. It's like you just need to find a central location where people can get to it easily. And that's great. Yeah. Nashville's a great place for stuff like that. That's awesome.
That's true. Yeah, that's very true.
Sorry. So anyway, a couple of news items that I don't think necessarily came out of the Con of Thrones. They just sort of happened at the same time. So I'm going to start with the good news, I think, which is cool. We learned that maybe we already knew this. The final episode of season 7 is going to be 82 minutes long.
Ooh,
so almost a movie.
Man, they should have just went for 90. Like, why not? Just
I know
make it
that's what I keep thinking is like, it must have just been some quirk of editing that it ended under 90. There is an episode this upcoming season that is only 50 minutes. So actually the shortest episode. But again, I figure there's just some quirk of editing. Like they realized like, hey, we don't want to just pad 10 minutes on this. So we're done.
I really wonder now, do we know, is that 50-minute one like the penultimate episode, or do we know where that falls in the order?
Oh, that is a great question. No, we don't. And actually, the news says that 2 season 7 episodes will exceed 60 minutes, in addition to the planned 82-minute finale. So we're going to have 3 episodes over an hour, which is really cool of them to do, And like we always talk about, that's just a great, exploit this new model of programming. You don't have to be stuck to an hour. You don't have to be stuck to 26 episodes per season or whatever. Like, just do whatever you want. You got the freedom.
I wonder if there was a lot of sort of hand wringing inside of HBO. Like, well, I don't know. Should we do that? Like, I would hope it was just like, yeah, of course, whatever you guys want. Like, make it 2 hours for all we need. I wonder if they encourage them to do 2 hours. Like, hey, we really want to make this the final.
I was going to say, like, don't you think that, at HBO, they're like, whatever you want, guys. Benioff, Weiss. Yeah.
I don't know. I still think back to that time when Lost was like the first network TV show to say, hey, we want to end this at 6 seasons. And the network's like, I don't know. Like we've never done that in the US before. That's just such a foreign concept. And then they did it. Now everybody does it. Now it's just like second nature, but it wasn't that long ago that even on HBO, which HBO's never had commercials. They should have been doing this back in 2005 and 6. And it's only like now that they're like, hey, we'll play around with the format a little bit, we'll go a little longer if we need to. I'm glad that we're finally there. It's so strange that we weren't back in the old school not that long ago. Does that make sense?
No, exactly. So no, I was just letting you go there because I agree. So that good news about longer episodes with season 7 leads into even cooler news, which this is actual news we heard this weekend, which was that in season 8, we could actually have feature length episodes.
Whoa.
So we know that season 8 is only going to have 6 episodes. And if a couple of those are like movie length to start, wrapping this up, I mean, that could be incredible.
And they better all be directed by Miguel Sapochnik, because he is absent this season. And I'm like, it better be true. Because he's
that
prepping.
was one of our hypotheses. Yeah.
He better be because he's prepping 6 2-hour movies to be filmed this year to be shown next year.
So I've let it that. That's the roller coaster going all the way up. Here's where it drops down. But we also learned season 8 might not arrive until 2019.
Yeah, but you know what? We can't not be sad about
angry about that as I am.
No, we shouldn't be. Nobody should be angry about that. Now, if this was season 4 or 5, I'd be a little annoyed. It's like, well, what's going on? But this is the last season, right? This is it until their stupid spinoffs start. So, I want, if they're going to be only 6 of them, and the escalation of quality, especially last season, like that 2-parter, Michael Sapochnik, Battle of the Bastards, Winds of Winter, double episode, like that was so good that I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about season 7 under the circumstances. If he's involved in any way, which I'm assuming because those were so good, they were so revered. He has been, he did Hard Home. He's done like the heavy hitter episodes of the last couple seasons. Right. I can only imagine they're like, Michael, we want you to hang back. We need you to start prepping 8 now. And because if they're going to be that long, if they're going to be that epic, that you need the production schedule to start like in January of this year for those things. So I would only hope, I'm just getting excited thinking about the idea of this. If they can manage to, put out new information or new idea, new updates in the meantime to kind of satiate all of us, that'll be great. One of the things they could do is maybe release another book next year in place of a season.
So
maybe,
just maybe. That's a great pivot point to go into what is going on with George R.R. Martin.
A whole lot of nothing, apparently.
We talked right before we hit record on what news we'd heard out of Con of Thrones, and I'd followed the Storm of Spoilers crew because I follow them on Twitter, and they were all instrumental in I believe actually setting up the whole con. So, and from them I got a lot of other news and tidbits out of con, but it really didn't sound like there was any George Martin stuff at all.
And he used to bring a couple pages or a chapter or two back and tease them a little bit. Like, hey, here's what I'm working on. Let me just say this too, because I know I can already sense out there, like some of the listeners are going to be like, man, you're sounding like Kathy Bates in Misery. Like, don't go down that road. Like, I get that. And I get that, there's that sort of temptation for all the fans to sort of, get pitchforks and torches and like go to his house and be like, we demand the book. However, we have now waited how long since the last book? How long has it been?
I believe it was right after the first season.
2010, 2011, maybe somewhere. I think it was 2011 was the last book. So maybe 6 years ago. And I understand, like, these are big ass books. This is basically like writing the Bible from scratch every time. And I understand that. But in this case, the fact that George R.R. Martin has been like literally like we haven't seen. When was the last time we saw new chapters? Was it last year or the year before? I forget.
That's a really good question too. I think it was maybe if it was last year. I think it was before the season even aired.
Yeah, so it was early last year.
Like it might have been 2016, but early 2016. But
I just remember they were like, there was some hope that they're like, we might have this book out by Christmas of 2016, and that came and went, and nobody said anything. So it's like, but here's my point. And again, I understand. I've been in these arguments before. They're like, we don't want a Misery situation here. We don't, James Caan and Kathy Bates. That's a whole. They can easily slip into that. However. He has now been working on this for like 6 years, and I understand that, with writing something new at this level, with this much demand and pressure is not easy. I myself am very behind on many things, both for us, in our projects, but also just in personal writing and stuff that I'm working on. I understand. Like, I completely get that mindset. George R. R. Martin doesn't have a day job. This is all he has to do. All he has to do is sit in his home or wherever he wants to write and just write. Like, he doesn't have to do other TV shows or other books or other projects as he seems to find himself, falling into. He doesn't have to go to every con in the world, to meet people. I mean, he can. I'm glad he does sometimes, but all he really has to do, his only job, is to write this book, or at least further this, get further along. And I feel like because maybe he's not as interested in as he once was. Maybe he just doesn't, maybe with the shows getting past him, exposing ideas that he sort of had hoped would be in the book, or at least going down a road that he thought he would be the first to break. And they're doing it very well, in my opinion. Maybe he's just sort of like, I don't have the oomph anymore. And like the world has gotten, he's not the god of his world anymore. Like, it's been taken over by others, like between the comics and the shows and the fans, recycling and re-examining every theory to 1,000 degrees. Like, maybe it's just like, hey, this world has grown beyond me. And he just doesn't have that same inspiration or impetus to write anymore. Cause he's been writing since the early 90s. Game of Thrones has been sort of in his head, at least since then. Yeah. So it's like, at some point, and maybe if that is the case, he just needs to do that thing that we've always sort of speculated, like bring in Neil Gaiman, bring in some other guys to basically help you finish. You can sort of executive produce, you've got the outline, you can dictate kind of what you want, but leave it to those guys to really get us over the finish line. I would be fine with that. It'd be a cool sort of way to see other points of view that are sort of within the vein of George R. R. Martin, but and they're people we respect that are his friends that could pull it off. And what are your thoughts?
I mean, it's funny because we started this podcast because it grew out of these long conversations we had about Game of Thrones on our other podcast, the Todd and Taylor Show. And probably on the very first one of those where you and I ever talked to Game of Thrones, I said, my friend Meg, who got me into the books, when she and I, this is 2 or 3 years ago or more, when she and I would talk about, do you think he'll be done with the next book before the next season? She would say, oh, it's so cute that you think it's actually ever going to happen. And I have grown since then into like, I don't really care. And you'd ask me on one of our first episodes, like, am I interested in reading the next book? And I think at the time I was like, if it comes out, at this point, I probably will. But I just don't know now if I care, but I sympathize with Martin, who has written many millions of words more than I do.
Yeah.
And,
exactly.
I struggle to make a deadline for, a 900-word article or something. And he's got these tomes. And I think what the frustrating part has got to be, and I don't know if this is, if you're a writing instructor, if this is a good takeaway from this or something, but I almost feel like if your art, if like the piece of art that you put out is a book, then it ought to almost be self-contained. And his big problem is those last 2 books are not at all self-contained. Like basically first 3 novels, you could kind of read on its own. You'd be confused, but there would be a story to it, And what's really exciting is 3 picks up right where 2 leaves off, as I recall. It's like no time passes. And so that's very exciting, But then 4 and 5, they happen simultaneously, and they're on different sides of the world, and they have all these characters that like we don't really care about. I mean, like if you think Daenerys's journey takes a long time in the show, it's like, oh my God, you have no idea. Like, she's still in fucking Marine in book 5.
Oh, geez. I forgot about that.
And book 5 ends with Jon dying. That's the end of it.
Wow.
So it's like he ended a book by murdering the main character of this, entire plot up there.
Well, here's a question. What? So like, is it going to be satisfying for book readers now, knowing, like, is it because they're so long and so detailed? And yeah, he's going to give you stuff the show hasn't shown you. But if he sticks to the same basic outline, is it going to be as satisfying for you as a book reader to be like, well, I know John's coming back to life. I mean, he may go about it a slightly different way or a slightly more detailed way, but is there, because before it was like, I don't know what's going to happen. And, the show is behind the book, so it makes sense to read the book, because then it's like, okay, this is the first time I'm experiencing this story. Yeah. Now you'll basically be getting it secondhand. I mean, with, you know, with some bells and whistles, but still, is that going to be interesting to you?
Uh, well, that's kind of why I just don't care about the book. I mean,
Yeah.
the uh oh man, I
Did I
really
just ruin
I
it? Did I just
no
ruin
no
it
no.
for you?
I'm trying to think of because I wrote a couple years ago when the raping of Sansa happened on the show, and I was just so disgusted with like how the show kept doing these things and never sort of paying them off later with justice, or like it was like the way they were handling everything in the moment was just a mess.
Mm-hmm.
uh Season 4 and 5 were just kind of messy in that way, and
Mm-hmm.
I was very frustrated, and I hated that they kept changing details from the books and sort of diverging from. And there was this writer, I believe it was 80 Robertson or Robinson from The Verge, who talked about how she was done with it, and because it had turned her into this what she called a lore hound of like
Mm.
where you're constantly checking like, well, what's the canon on that, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's what I've been doing too. And I think that since it's like Martin himself is almost just a lore hound now. Like
Yeah.
it's just fucking lore. Like it doesn't.
I mean, think
Let
about
me
this.
put that another way. So, like
Okay.
in our fan theories episode that we put out last week, we were talking about a couple of fan theories of like, for example, like who is Azor Ahai, and we'll talk about that in a minute again. But um, this is this prince who was promised this kind of like prophetic character that's sort of Christ-like, that supposedly came before to end the long night, and
Mhm.
so if it's Jon Snow or Jon Targaryen, like too on the nose to us, like
Mhm.
as because Game of Thrones has all these great conspiracy theories of who could it be or whatever. But if you think about it, like actually, but if you read it from the books, and it takes so long for Jon to kind of redeem himself and become a leader and like figure out his parentage and all that kind of stuff, that's actually like a really clever storytelling thing. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily too on the nose, because the way Martin gets there, I mean, he kills them, and all these other things, like it doesn't necessarily it's not a thing that you realize like in the in the first book, like, oh yeah, that
Yeah.
guy's going to turn out to be the you don't really know where he's going to go. So it really is a great piece of storytelling. It's just that it's taken so long, and there's so much other lore and history and world building that story point almost seems insignificant, because he's given us so many details about this world and this history of the world that our brains are going crazy trying to connect to all the sort of theories in this world. And it's like, no, man, you got away from the basic cool story, like plot point.
Yeah.
Um,
It's the first time we've
it,
ever experienced a story of this magnitude, um, that isn't done before all the other multimedia stuff begins. So like with Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion and all that, like that was done 70 years ago, long before any movies or anything started. Dune, same thing, all the Dune books, even
yeah.
the weird ones by Brian Herbert or whatever his son's name is. Those are all done. So anything moving forward is going to be that base, that foundation is there. It's solid. It's set. Anything else can be built on that. Star Wars, same thing. Like the first 3 Star Wars movies were done before the books began, before the prequels, before anything else. Like that original story. So this is the first time we've had something that isn't done, that everything else is kicking in. And I wonder, is there an opportunity to try something new and say, and this is from George R. R. Martin's perspective, and say, you know what? This is the first time this kind of thing has ever happened. I've put a ton of work into this. I'm going to now step back and basically be like the grand maester of all Game of Thrones things. And I'm going to commit. If you want to commission a story, if you want to do fan fiction, if you want to do comics, the show obviously exists. Come to me. I'll basically give you sort of the framework that you have to operate from, or if you want to, make sure something is canon worthy, I'm the keeper of that. But otherwise, the story now exists beyond me. And like from now on, there won't be a final book. There won't be any more books. I might do like little writings here and there. I might take some of the chapters and make them little like short novellas, or I might turn one into a comic or something. But from this point on, like everything has pivoted, and like I'm the fulcrum that holds everything together. But everything is now past me, and like and just accept that. Like, is there anything wrong with that idea?
Man, I love that you brought up Star Wars in there, because I was about to say, well, it happened with Star Wars.
Yeah.
But I think Star Wars is actually a great parallel, because Lucas had bits of that world and that history there. You know, I mean, we know that from that script of the Star Wars where there were certain details that were different, but there was some history that was alluded to. And then there are these callbacks that we've seen in recent movies about like the Star Killer was, you know, Luke Skywalker's original last name. And, you know, so there were, but anyway, Lucas made these films and he, you know, had like a novelization of them that may have filled in some stuff, but then he really did act as that kind of editor in chief or you know, ombudsman of the universe. And people started putting it together. And I remember several years ago, way before the you know, new movies were being put together, I believe it was Wired magazine did this great profile on the actual like ombudsman of the Star Wars canon. And this guy who knew everything that had been written in all the novelizations and all the comic books and stuff. And
it wasn't Lawrence Kasdan, it was somebody else.
No, it was just a dude that worked for Lucasfilm, and his he was the guy that would kind of approve your stories. So if you were, you know, if you got the commission to write the new Star Wars novel and you wanted to bring in this character from whatever, he was the one that would say, no, that person grew up on this planet and that was established in this novel and you can't change that. And, you know, there was a person that kept it all in canon. And I love that idea that that's what Martin becomes. I think what Martin has done, for better or worse, like I get the artistic instinct to just be in total control of your world that you've created, but it is definitely made it so that like there's a definite like bottleneck.
Well, and it's like he seems to be the kind of guy who has way more fun going to cons, you know, chatting with everybody, basically geeking out over his own stuff, you know, and basically being that guy. Why not just surrender to them and be like, you know what, there won't be any more books in this traditional sense. Like he's written, you know, he co-authored the World of Ice and Fire, you know, so that encyclopedia exists, and he could just go off and be that guy and just let the world of Westeros exist and it'll be the first time, but maybe not the last time. Like, you know, there's going to be other creators who are going to be in the same position 5, 10, 20 years down the road. Like this isn't going to be a one-time thing. So there's an opportunity to sort of set up, you know, what could this be? And really, you know, not just be depressed that he can't catch up and just, you know, be constantly, you know, feeling like he's trapped in Kathy Bates' house, and all the fans are like demanding like this book. Like, why not just surrender and be like, you know what? I have put in more than enough time on this. Like, I want to write an episode again, or I want to be that guy who helps, you know, if they want to do an animated spinoff, like he's the guy that basically gets to have all the fun and not have to do all the work.
I wish he would do that. And you and I know from like our professional work and our creative work, like you've got to have a release valve in there somewhere. Yeah. And if he thinks his only escape from this is a 2,000-page book, then he's never going to find that like release valve. And your idea of like, why not write the story of Jon Targaryen as a series of short chapters like the Dunk and Egg Adventures? Like just put out a short, like, you know, not like actual, I would call it a novella, but only a novella in Martin's world. Like it's actual novel length that just tells the Jon Snow story, just tells the Daenerys story. Like I really don't give a shit what's happening at the Citadel. You know, like I don't care about massive, huge swaths of this world. And books 4 and 5 were just huge wastes of my time, you know?
Well, that's the other side of this coin that, you know, we don't often get into is that, he's put all this work into the world, but the last 2 books weren't as good as the first 3. And so you're like, are we waiting this whole time for just to be disappointed? Now I'm obviously, you know, as I've confessed many times, I haven't read all the books. I just started with the show, and maybe one day I'll go back if I have time. But like, I just feel like the show for me provides most, with the exception of season 5, provides most of, you know, a better glimpse into that, a more efficient glimpse into that world than with the books. I think about, like, you know, another person comes to me. Well, before I get to that, the other point I was going to make is I think in his unique case, because he was so prolific in the past, because, you know, he did put all, you know, each book is massive. I think there's this other sort of expectation, misguided or not, from the fans. That's like, dude, you've already written massive books. Why is this so hard for you? It's like, you know, you are prolific. And I think that just speaks more to the fact that he just might be burned out on this whole thing. Like, just the idea of having to finish is like, dude, I just can't. Like, I'm not as the excitement, because when it's let's think about this. If you are a creator and you have given birth to this world of these characters and a language and just all that stuff, and you are sort of the original, you're the origin point for that story, then every year that goes on, like there's that sort of like, ooh, I get to share with the world, the real world, like this, the next phase of the story. I get to tell you where these characters get to go. Once you don't have that control anymore, once sort of the world has taken it from you and has run with it, I just don't see how, in my own view, it can't be as fun or as interesting, or that spark isn't quite the same, right? So it's just like, why not? I don't know. I would imagine J.K. Rowling, this is a great comparison point. J.K. Rowling, the movies had started, and I don't think she had finished the second, maybe the last two or maybe the last three books when the first movie had started. So there was a race all of a sudden. Like it was like a race against time for her to finish the book series before the movies catch up to her. And she did. I mean, it was kind of under the wire, but she did. And she did it to the point where I think they only took a year off in between movies. Like I think every movie was basically every year. But I think there was 1 year where there was like it was a missed timing, I think, maybe because of the books. But she finished that last book and she locked herself, famously locked herself in a hotel, basically left her family, disappeared from public view, and finished that goddamn last book. And, there's a documentary on one of the Harry Potter Blu-rays where, it follows her around during the last, the launch of the last book. And it starts with her in that hotel room with a laptop, finishing it up. And she talks about, why she's like, I needed to focus. I couldn't have any distractions. I just had to do this and just get it done. And, she's still like, oh man, maybe I shouldn't have done this. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. But she turned it in and it was done. And just that feeling, like seeing her go through the motions and just like actually just, flip on the workman side of her creativity was inspiring and interesting. And it's like, that could have gone the other way. She could have just panicked and said, I don't know. And then then the movies are sitting there on, basically waiting for 3 or 4 years for her to finish. And those movies, much like Game of Thrones, were, their sets were built, casts were, all the cast was on contract. Like, hey, you got to come back every year and we got to keep going. And if there's if the production has to stop and, crew and cast either have to be paid to do nothing or they get to go on to other jobs, and then it's a scheduling nightmare. So it very similar. She was in that same boat. And I just feel like Martin is,
he's missing momentum. I think and when we started this little section about talking about Martin was, we didn't see any new chapters before the season comes out. And he was making sort of regular con appearances and reading various chapters over the past several years. So I confirmed that Dance with Dragons was 2011. So it's been 6 years since that book came out. And as I recall, it was sometime in the summer when it came out, I think.
Yeah.
So when the show this is only our 7th season, it must have started I believe the show started in 2011.
It did.
I really think that's what happened. I think the book came out in the summer because I remember seeing it at Comic-Con, and then the show started that fall. And
no, the show started that summer.
So that summer. So literally he has not published another book in the series since the show started,
Yeah.
So he had momentum right when it started. He's working in the series. He's writing an episode every year. He's showing up at cons with these chapters and stuff, but it's just kind of faded out. And you can't really say that the show created those last 2 books because they were done before the show ever aired. So honestly, like I have no ill will towards Martin on any of this.
Let's make
not like I'm not criticizing. I'm literally sympathizing as a guy who tries to write books and cannot imagine this predicament of how many thousands of pages, and
then with the world watching and waiting, and the fact that you're now having to run behind a moving train that has passed you. Before it was, I'll use one more metaphor. Before it was, he had to lay the track. He saw the train in the distance, and the smoke was billowing out of the top. It was coming. It was in the distance for a while, and he's like, okay, I'm still laying track. I've got some time. And then in the last 2 or 3 years, that train has been right there, and it's like, when that train had to stop, he just, you feel like the pressure and the rumbling of it as it's right there as you're still trying to lay track. And now he basically, the train has basically veered off on another track, and he had to stop laying his track and start to run after that train. And it's just like, I don't know how you do it. And again, I think honestly, we shouldn't expect, this isn't going to be like Tolkien where like everything's done. I think this is a unique opportunity to really think about what does a story look like in the 2017 multimedia world. And it's a good question to ask any creator, right? If you do comics or books or short stories or whatever it might be, if you get optioned for something else, like a movie or a TV show or whatever that is, you should almost have a plan. Like, what if at some point I still want to keep making my story, and you either have to decide, hey, my story is going to just be its own thing, and whatever other mediums exist that's cool, and I'll my blessing is on those things. But my story, I feel no obligation to make my story match what those things are. That's one option. The other option is, hey, I'm basically launching a world, and I know from the get-go that other people are going to basically get to play in the sandbox, and the world will be whatever we all say it is. And and it will start with me, but it's not going to end with me. And just kind of expect that going into it, because then it's like, it's a lot more comfortable for you as a creator. Because at some point, I would imagine he wants to do something else besides just Game of Thrones.
God, yes, of course.
He used to write TV shows. He used to write a bunch of stuff. This has consumed his life for the past 10, for sure, since the show has started, years. And it's just like, at some point, I'm assuming like Lucas, George Lucas famously always said, I want to do other movies. I just don't want this to be my life. And it became Star Wars became his life. Like, he couldn't escape it. Even his sub businesses, all the things that, Industrial Lights and Magic, all the things that arrived as a result of the Star Wars universe are still tied to the Star Wars universe.
Yeah.
It's still like, so it's I don't know.
I love this idea of like, what a better idea than to become the curator of that universe than the architect of it.
Yeah.
In the
You can be both. It's like, I was the original architect and now I'm the curator. And it's like, and he would love it. Like, having people basically come to pay homage, to be like, we'd love to do this comic. Give us the boundaries and everything. And he's like, oh yes, of course. And he can like go into his whole thing and basically that guy. And then it's like, then the chain, like he's free to do whatever he wants to do, and then nobody's going to give him shit about it. Like, how awesome would that be?
And of course, it's so stupid but fun for us to imagine, like, if we were in that person's place. But
you put you put something else
just for the sake of that.
You put something else in the notes though about Dark Tower, and I'm curious what this means.
Oh, we had talked about that before, about the idea that like Stephen King wrote a novel or a series of novels, and then basically said everything else can contribute to this world. Not like the TV show is really just going to build off that world. Comics can build off that world. Like, what if, and it's kind of the Star Wars thing that we're saying. I mean, Martin could have done that. He could have said, hey, 5 books is all you're getting out of me.
Yeah.
Let's put out a history of the world. Let's put out some short stories, a TV show, spinoffs, whatever. But like, that's it. He doesn't need to retell the story of that's being told in the show at this point.
Yeah.
But
especially because the show is so, the show is so cinematic at this point. I'm not sure a book is going to do it as much justice, to be honest.
Well, so I was going to say, like, just for that fun exercise of putting myself in his head, I think what I would do at this point is sit down and go, what are the loose ends that I absolutely have to finish?
Yeah.
Finish them up in one book. And just put that out. And every other chapter, fucking Sansa getting engaged to Harold Harding, and like Sam being down at the Citadel with Gilly and all that bullshit. Like, make another World of Ice and Fire part 2 or something, but don't put that in the novel. Just finish it up. 6 books. Make the 6th one like as short as the first one. Just wrap it up, like make it a cool wrap up. That would be so great.
There's a little symmetry. Oh, go ahead.
You asked me about like my enthusiasm of reading the books, as I think we've talked about over the course of this long podcast. But and I think that's the reason why I'm not enthusiastic, is because I don't want to read a 2,000-page book and then have to wait for another 2,000-page book. Just give me a 300 page book.
Especially when half of that book is stuff you've already seen before. You're like, even if he takes,
or it's telling it in some weird different way just to be different or something.
Yeah, we were like, that's not as good or that's better. But the Dark Tower thing is interesting because it's it started off as Stephen King's unified string theory for his own work, right? Like it's like, I'm going to do the impossible and find a way to connect the freaking Shining to the Green Mile. Watch. And so like that was kind of his method to do that. And in doing so, he created this even richer, deeper world that everybody's like, that was his opus, yes, but it was also his sort of attempt to say everything I've written fits together in some weird way, and here's how. So from the beginning, it was almost meant to be this platform, if you will, for all the stuff. And I like that. I love that the movie is like, hey, we're just an extension of that platform. We're not going to try to retell you something that's happened in the Dark Tower book. Like, this is another chapter in that. Like, I just love that fitting in. The comics, were another chapter in that. And so I feel like it's, as always, Stephen King is kind of like setting, I think like that is probably going to be moving forward, for serious creators. Like, that's the way to think about your work. Unless you're just doing a one-off short story that you're like, this isn't going to be anything else. Although they said that about The Hobbit back in the day, that was meant to be just, a one-off thing. And, Jesus. Because then The Hobbit came.
That is what, like, Martin should look at the Hobbit movies and go, Christ, I don't want that to happen to my book.
Well, Martin's too.
Let me just wrap this up. But maybe he loved that. Maybe he was like, I really wondered, should we tell the story of those orcs as little children? Let's go back and do that. He can get together with Lucas and do that.
God, I just that brings to mind the fact that HBO is going to do spin-offs or prequels or whatever you want to call them. And I'm not, of Game of Thrones. And, we don't know anything about, which characters or which time period. I will tell you this. I am not that excited about that. You might be like, you guys host a podcast. Aren't you thrilled that the world of Ice and Fire will continue? I'm like, not really, because it's, I think anything that exists outside of the show that's, that's filmed only deludes the show. I think once this is done, it will be such a epic body of work. Anything else you try to do is just going to feel like it's sort of second rate by comparison. Even if you tell me like
you can't go smaller, no, at this point, you can't go back to telling the story of Arya wandering the Riverlands with the Hound.
Well, not even that, but like, even if you tell me like, we're going to show you how the Targaryens took over to begin with and go back that far. Like, yeah, that's cool. But it's just like knowing where the future is going. I just don't think that's just not as interesting to me. Like, what's interesting about Game of Thrones right now is, will the wall fall down? Will Westeros be reinvaded by these White Walkers? Nobody knows. This is all completely fresh powder. And I just feel like prequels, we saw what happened when a prequel isn't handled correctly, a la, episodes 1, 2, and 3 of Star Wars. And we've seen what happens when it's handled really, really well, a la Rogue One. And it's such a freaking crapshoot, especially at that level. Like, HBO is getting greedy now. They're like, ooh, we want more. And, and Benioff and Weiss, they may be involved, but I doubt they have the energy or enthusiasm to keep going after this is all done. I would imagine they're like, yeah, we'll produce, but we're not writing anymore. We're not going to be, and who knows? It may be amazing. I think it's such a gamble that I would much rather see HBO invest that same time and money in something completely new. Like, give me the next new cool thing I never knew I wanted.
Yeah, I agree. And with that, let's move to positive conversation and what we're looking forward to in this season.
And I would advise everybody go back and listen to the Wednesday in Westeros Fan Theories crossover episode, because we definitely get into a lot of that there. But I think in addition to that, just big heavy hitter moments. I really want to see the dragons in all their glory, just doing cool dragon things, like mowing down Lannisters, mowing down White Walkers. I want to see a scene. It may not happen this season and maybe next season, but I want a scene where a dragon is like, funneling fire down on like the Night King, and he's repelling it back with some kind of ice power or something. Just give me as much fantasy, because we have progressively added more and more fantasy elements as the seasons have gone on, and for good measure, because like in the very beginning, a lot of that stuff in the world of the show, a lot of that stuff had passed into myth. The reason that the Night's Watch exists had been almost forgotten. It's like, oh yeah, it's just where we send all our losers and criminals and stuff. Like, yeah, they don't. It used to be an honor.
Wildlings were their enemy, not the.
Yeah, it's like it's like they somehow thought, oh yeah, the wall was built to keep out the wildlings. Like, really? Like, just so we start the show or start the story in a world that has kind of evolved beyond that, and each season is like a step back into these really big mythological things that, like the Targaryens are back in Westeros. And that was like, oh, dragons never existed. That was just a bunch of nonsense, like fake news, that never happened. Robert Baratheon was really the Donald Trump of Westeros, if you think about it. Like, he's just like constantly like, remember that back in the first season, they're like, hey, Daenerys Targaryen is actually alive and she might, she's kind of wandering around. We should probably do something about her. He's like, yeah, she has no dragons. That's just a bunch of bullshit. Like, that's not going to matter. Like he was constantly like, just kind of like downplaying everything. And, so I want to see that. I want to see, the big moments, Jon Snow meeting Daenerys, Arya meeting Sansa, just like the wall falling down. I'm really hoping this whole thing ends, this season ends with either the wall falling down or something at that level. The Targaryens battling the Tyrion maybe confronting Cersei or Jaime again. What happens to Jaime and Cersei? Just like those, we're to that place now where like everything story-wise is going to be big. So like, I just want to see it all unfold.
Yeah. So I've been rewatching from season 2 up, and I just finished season 4. And
season skip 5. You don't even need that.
I'm pretty much gonna skip 5, and I've already watched season 6 like this year. So
I take that back. Skip 5, except for Hard Home. Just watch that,
right.
Like, and then move on.
And 4, I think we have previously kind of dismissed 4 as like it was hard to watch. We didn't really care about, like, it wasn't moving it along the right way or something. But
that was 4, more 5 to me. 4 was better.
Okay, good. 4 has a crazy body count, and so many important things happen in 4 in such quick succession. And so I think what I'm anticipating is like, and it's funny even to think that in 2 and 3, I had this impression of like, there were episodes where I would go, what happened there? Like, where are they going? Like, when I think back, I think of like, well, Arya and the Hound like just wandered forever. And it's like, no, actually they didn't, now that I kind of have gone back and watched it. They have some side quests that I don't really care about, that don't really advance stuff. But in 4, Joffrey dies in like episode 2. Oberyn dies not in a Ned's Head episode 9, but in episode 8. And then Tyrion kills Tywin in 10. And there's that huge battle with there's a giant battle with the wildlings in like 9, and then maybe in 10 is when Stannis' army sweeps in and decimates them.
Oh, that's right.
So it's like so much crazy shit happens in that season. I say all that as prelude to say, I hope in season 7, it's basically like that happens every week. I really want, it's kind of like what I want from the book. That. I want something to get answered definitively every week.
They've sort of every interview that I've seen is basically like confirming that is the case. Like, hey, we're done wasting time. Like, it's going to be like boom, boom. By the way, I was looking at the episodes on Wikipedia. Isn't it crazy to think that The Bear and the Maiden Fair was season 3? That was season 3. That was 4 years ago now. I always think that like all the cool Brienne stuff was more recent, but that was season goddamn 3. Wow.
It's actually, so I haven't gone back and watched season 1, but I think that I may have transferred a lot of my feelings about season 2 and 3. I think that might have come from season 1. I actually think season 1 is the one where it has a sort of too much clever talking for me, which I know is what drew me in. What I think drew in a lot of people was this idea that like the politicking was just as interesting as the action and the fantasy of it. And that's definitely true. That's definitely what I liked. I mean, I remember just reading like book 2, I thought was so crazy, and it sort of disappointed me they couldn't get all that politicking and like backstabbing into the show. Like so much more happens, and I was like, oh, this is just so juicy. But I guess now that we're near the end, my perspective is, let's just start wrapping these things up. Let's
I think it's important to look at who's directing this season. And I say that only because like, having figured out that Mikhail Sapochnik is so goddamn good. I'm eagerly looking for his name, but then Jeremy murdered this last name. Jeremy Podeswa. Jeremy Podeswa is doing the first episode and the last episode of season 7. And you may remember him from he did The Red Woman and Home last year. He's done a lot of 2-parters or a lot of 2 episodes. He did like a bunch in season 5. Well, that should give us pause then. He came in on season 5. I don't see him earlier than that. And then Alan Taylor, who's been around since season 1, is doing the penultimate episode, the Ned's Head of season 7. Alan Taylor. Alan Taylor has got some. He's done all the last. He did the last episode of season 1 and 2. He did The North Remembers, and he's been out. He's not been back since season 2, so he's coming back.
And by the way, I don't think we're going to get an Ed's Head this season. I don't think we're going to have the rhythm that was established in those first 3 or 4 seasons, and even up until I mean, honestly, even last year, I guess we had the Battle of the Bastards that was 9, and then Winds of Winter was 10. I don't think it's going to be the same arc. I think starting this episode of Wednesday in Westeros talking about those episode lengths is probably a good indicator of like, I think a lot of this is, if it's a 50-minute episode, we know it's going to be like expository. And if it's an 82-minute episode, we know it's going to be cinematic and it's going to answer a bunch of questions, and I don't think we're going to have that sort of cranking exposition up to one huge climax for the season, or at least I hope not. I hope it's just kind of like, if anything, that finale that's 82 minutes, I bet that's where we have the cliffhanger. And that's what annoys me about having to wait till 2019 for season 8 is if we have a cliffhanger in the very last.
If it's The Wall Falls Down, then that's a great cliffhanger. I mean, like that's going to just be, because think about all the conjecture and theories that you can noodle on for a year and a half, in the meantime. Like that's a great, if the cliffhanger is, oh, Daenerys kills Jon, or something like, well, it's got to be, the cliffhanger has got to be massive, and the only one that comes to mind is The Wall Falls Down.
And I just
unless they screw with us and have that happen like in the second episode, then it's like, holy shit, like then what?
Which honestly, it probably should happen in like the first or second episode, because where are 6 episodes of the White Walkers above the wall? Like what happens there? That would be so boring.
I feel like here's how
I know it's not going to be boring. Just I want that conflict to happen,
Oh, me too. But that, I mean, let's be honest. That needs to be all of season 8 is White Walkers versus everybody. Because if you think about how everything's been consolidating, now we're down to like all the little fiefdoms and all the little infighting has basically been rolling into each other. So now we basically have Cersei versus everybody in Westeros, more or less, her and, what the hell, the brother, Euron, Cersei and Euron versus everybody. And then it's, then the Daenerys versus Westeros. But then I think Daenerys and Jon are going to, once that alliance is firmed up, then it's Daenerys and Jon, / the North versus the Lannisters. So I think the crux of the story is, how do we beat the Lannisters once and for all? And then while that's all gestating, I just like this constant, building of the threat. Maybe maybe at the end of episode 6, you see all the White Walkers and all the whites and everybody just amassed at the wall. And like everybody's, just thousands upon thousands of them. And the spiders maybe come up, show up too. Because as we know, they used to ride giant spiders. All of that's at the wall. And then at the end of 7, it's like, holy shit, maybe the battles, the climax of the main battle is happening, but it's like the Night King has the Horn of Winter, and then Sam down in Expository Town or Exposition Town is gonna tell us about the Horn of Winter.
Maester Exposition, you called him last time.
Maester Exposition, yeah, Maester Exposition. So Sam is that's the only reason he's still around. Let's be honest. Like the only reason that dude is alive in an old town is to deliver big chunks of important lore. That like they should have just cast George R. R. Martin as being the Grand Maester. Like just put him there. Like,
oh my God. Oh,
it's going to be like Michael Gambon, I think, or it's somebody like that.
Now I feel like they've really messed up by not throughout the series constantly cutting away to an actual George R. R. Martin in like a wizard robe.
He could be like the Stan Lee of this whole universe. Like, they'll make it make sense.
So yeah, I mean, we're going to plug this over and over, but seriously, in that episode we did with Fan Theories, where you and Peter were talking about Michael Gambon reprising his Dumbledore role, and like, oh, I've found this ancient scroll that tells, and just it cuts away to Old Town, and he's just reading exposition out of a antique book. I think that is so perfect. I mean, maybe that 50-minute episode is it's just a single shot of a dude at a desk reading out of a scroll for 50 minutes to fill in all the bullshit.
It's just him. Like, who is it? Who is going to be
that? And I was thinking of the you were saying that, and I was thinking of the Columbo character from Princess Bride, where it just cuts away and he's like,
yeah. Hang on, I'm gonna
Sorry, you're asking who is the Grand Maester.
I'm gonna look that up, but you talk about your other theory, because I see on the notes you have a listed theory about Ned.
Yeah, it's funny. It's the only one that I mean, there's tons of fan theories, but I hadn't heard this until after we did our fan theories episode, which is that Ned may not be dead. And I vaguely remember some goofy stuff in the book. And when I was reading whatever article, I'll try to find it and put it in our show notes. But it was about that chapter in the book is told from Arya's point of view, and she's very far away. She's in the crowd. She can't, I mean, she accepts that it is her father that walks out, but she doesn't see his face. And when he kneels, he's mumbling something. And so there is this chance that he warged into an eagle or something if it was Ned. And there's also this chance that it might have been a faceless man. And there's a crazy theory that it might have been like a Jockin who could have been in the cells with Ned and somehow swapped faces with him or something like that. Although that doesn't really make sense because the faces come from dead men and whatever. But the warg thing I think is really interesting. And one of the things that got me interested in the books way back when was John Hodgman did an excellent interview with George R. R. Martin on, I believe, the Sound of Young America podcast, which is now called Bullseye with Jesse Thorne. Definitely look up that episode on MaximumFun.org. It is really good. And this was before I'd even read the books, I guess, and I was just kind of dipping my toes in it. And Hodgman talked about one of the really interesting things about your books is, dead doesn't always mean dead. Even when he said that, I was like, I wonder if they're talking about Ned, like that was one of those. So when I read this theory, I went, man, what if the death that it's not a good literary device, because what separated Game of Thrones and Song of Ice and Fire from all fantasy literature was they killed the hero protagonist with all the honor in that first series. And that was so important, that happened.
Yeah.
And so I don't think, like, in a literary device, I don't think it works very well. But
my question, let's say that's true. My question is, what the hell was Ned doing in the time in between? Like, it better be good, because like I don't know if there's any justification that's like, oh, he was busy doing this. I'm like, it does. None of that answers the fact that he had never bothered to get in contact with any of his kids to be like, yo, this is the plan. I'm still alive. And here's this. Like, not once. It's like, why?
Honestly, I think that's where a lot of sort of Game of Thrones conspiracy theories fall apart, is the showrunners have done an excellent, like amazing job of planting things way back, like through the series. If there's going to be payoff on something, it is, if it's the three-eyed raven, Bran has been seeing that before anyone even says the words three-eyed raven, that kind of thing. It's like, when you go back and try to watch season 2, try to imagine it with an open mind and to think, well, when I was watching it, I don't think that I went, what does that three-eyed raven mean? What are we going to find out about that? It just shows up. And it's stitched together so well. And I like a really crazy thing that Storm of Spoilers brought up when they did their season 2 recap. And when I went back and watched it, I saw it too. And even though I just heard them talk about it, I was still like caught off guard by it. Is that there's a really funny meme of when Stannis is with the watch at the wall, and someone says less men or something like that, and it cuts to Stannis in the background going fewer, and people made a meme of him saying fewer. It's grammatically correct. You don't have a less number, you have a fewer number.
Oh, I see. And
but that is actually a callback to season 2. He's on the boats with Sir Davos, and Davos says something about less ships or something like that, and Stannis goes fewer. And we all kind of missed it in season 2. Like, it was just a part of their dialogue. It wasn't as funny a stinger, and so when it shows up in season 5 or whatever, it became this like hilarious thing, but it was actually, that was a part of his character that had been established 3 years earlier.
Wow.
So anyway, they've just done such a good job of connecting all the lines like that things like Ned warging into a bird are ridiculous. That turns into a total Deus Ex Machina thing, because if that were ever to happen, the showrunners would have been planting things like, bird's eye views of the city and his children and stuff like that. And, there would have been all these shots that later on we would have discovered, like, oh, that was Ned, I really think that they had a really good view of where this was going. And then it became a huge chess game of like, how do we get those pieces on the board? Or maybe a game of Risk, how do we get all these pieces on the board and moved from A to B? And when we book readers nitpick details and stuff like that, that's where those are the casualties of that kind of plotting. But the benefit of it is that it is very, very consistent to rewatch and see a lot of those overarching things. So like a lot of,
let me put it a different way. And, we have Spider-Man Homecoming coming to theaters this week. Imagine if Uncle Ben secretly didn't die. And, you have all of the motivations, all of the agency of Peter Parker is based on the fact that Uncle Ben frickin' died. And he basically, he was indirectly responsible for that, depending, pick your sort of version of the story. If all of a sudden you have Uncle Ben come back to life and it's like, oh no, his brain was taken by the Osborns, and it's been, in this thing this whole time, and we've recreated him and here he is. And it's like, you take away everything. You take it. I mean, and you could even argue, well, Spider-Man has had become Spider-Man, and this is just him basically having that chance at his life back. But the whole sort of moral agency of the story falls apart as soon as you do that. And I feel like the same thing, the entire journey of Arya, Sansa, all of them, it's heightened, and it's given more weight by the fact that they keep losing these people close to them, especially the ones that are the very embodiment of nobility and honor. And it's like, as soon as you bring that person back to life through some way or another, like the story starts to fall apart in a big bad way. And then like the domino effect of like, well, maybe why the hell were they? Why was Arya allowed to basically, why was Sansa allowed to basically suffer? Like if there was a scene, like going back to your point, if we had seen a scene where like a raven landed, while Brienne was keeping watch over Sansa to try to save her, like if a raven or some creature landed and was like a little too helpful, and you're like, wait, what was that about? Like then you'd be like, okay, he was trying to, if that was Ned somehow, he was trying to fill in the gaps. But then all of a sudden, if Ned can warg, what the hell is the point of Bran? What's the point of all that stuff if all of a sudden every Stark kid can just warg at will? Like it's just a magic power that just reveals itself whenever it needs to. Like it's too many things.
I agree, and I think the show has made some tough choices there, because some of those things honestly work better. There would be an interesting, it's like when we were talking about that Bret Easton Ellis quote. There's no ambiguity in film that I was bringing up. Like you can't. There can be a literary device, like when Bran dreams in the second season, second book, and he is a wolf running through the fields. We don't really know if that's a dream or if he's actually, we later discover, he can actually go into his wolf's body and do that. So when Arya dreams in the books that she is running through Westeros in the body of her wolf, we don't really know. Like in the books, it's ambiguous. Is she really warging when she's sleeping into her wolf that's, Nymeria, that's been gone for so long? Because we know that Bran can do that, so we're confused. But if they did that in the show, it would almost be like, oh wait, she definitely warged into that wolf. And so they almost have to leave it out entirely, because it's harder to represent it as like an ambiguous dream and leave the audience in that state of,
dude, I'm still running into people.
Like I said,
Lady Stoneheart's going to show up. Like still, even like I was on IO9 earlier, and there's still there's not many, but they're still out there. Like, oh, she'll show up. Don't you worry. I'm like, what would the point be? And nobody. It's like there's a certain demographic of fans. Well, there's a certain demographic of fans who. I am a huge fan of the show because I'm a huge fan of very strong, logically based storytelling. And as soon as you betray that, I'm not as much fan of the show anymore. There's another subgroup of fans who just want every ship and fan theory to be put on screen. And it's like, no, the show wouldn't be good if you did that. Like, no. And it's like there's just no convincing them otherwise. And the show could end and they would still be like, well, there'll be another episode. They'll do like a wrap-up episode later on, and they'll show what she's been up to, and then they'll show her, and that will be, I'm like, no, it wouldn't make any goddamn sense.
No, and her
falls into that.
Yeah. Her exclusion makes more sense now, because I mean, and like I said, it was aggravating in the moment, and I'm sure it will be aggravating through the next 2 seasons, although we're past the book, so book readers kind of can't get aggravated anymore. But that's where those things were, where the showrunners had to change details in order to advance the plot.
Yeah.
Which is super confusing. And I think there are really legitimate criticisms to how they handled, rape or violence against women as a plot device or like almost like a trick, to just kind of like horrify or elicit sympathy or anger or whatever it was supposed to do in the moment. And they weren't really considering the characterization because they really were trying to advance the plot.
Yeah.
And they had to get certain characters to a certain place. Like they couldn't let, this is a terrible thing, but it's just, you think of the Ramsay Sansa relationship, like they didn't have another season to figure out how to get Sansa from the Eyrie to Harold Harding to wherever George Martin's going to get her up there to where like she rescues Jane Poole or whatever was going to happen.
Jesus. Can you imagine if Jane Poole had actually been a thing in the show? Like how confusing it would be. I mean, especially with Arya, like face dancing and everything, like I just can't imagine. So
I think there are a bunch of mistakes that the show made in that way of or at least that, not mistakes, but I don't know. There are bad things they did in their characterizations and in their writing that we can legitimately criticize, but this overall consistency of like plot and tying up the loose ends and moving towards that goal has been just so solid, so this is all to underscore your point of we can't bring in Lady Stoneheart, I wouldn't think, and we certainly don't want to bring Ned back from the dead because it undermines the whole idea that like all these plot threads were tied together. The Lady Stoneheart stuff in the book, the coolest thing about it is that the Red Wedding has happened in book 3 and everybody has gone, holy shit, I can't believe that happened. Mm-hmm. And then the book ends with this apparition sort of figure, not an apparition, but like this zombie-like figure extracting revenge. And so you end on that note, and it is a great cliffhanger in that regard because it doesn't really have to do with the plot of stuff. So it almost would have been cool if that were like episode 10 of season 3, but then it wouldn't make any sense to be at the start of a new season because we don't want to have a whole season of, Brienne's story is gone. Like we don't need Lady Stoneheart hanging her and shit like that. It's just, it's so stupid. Like it's like bringing back I
forgot about that.
It's just, it's so goofy.
I forgot. Yeah, let's okay, everybody out, every fan jonesing for Lady Stoneheart. Let's just remember one simple thing. She hangs Brienne without any logic or reason, or just there's no point to it. She hangs Brienne. Like that just seems like a little bit of indulgence from George R.R. Martin that just wasn't. We didn't need that. Like I just don't understand.
Books 4 and 5 or stuff like that. Like, let's hang Brienne, but she does convince her to release her or something like that. Like, okay, well, why did we waste 20 pages reading about that?
Yeah.
But even that's not even important, man. Why did we read 20 pages about some guy running through the streets of Old Town, like picking pockets? Jesus Christ, man.
I distinctly remember, though. I remember in another episode of this show, you had said you had expressed some sort of optimism or excitement on the fact that, if we saw like the last climactic battle and you're like, and the camera would pan across and we'd see there, Lady Stoneheart would be there. And like, just, you were kind of listing off all the characters that you thought would be fun just to throw in. And I'm like, I remember thinking, please, no, I just, no.
It turns into like one of those comic book things where it's like Secret Wars or Civil War or something where you have that battle where it's like, there's 100 superheroes. There's this huge like instead of just an army of red shirts that are all going to get wasted, it's like every person on that field is someone significant. There's a eagle with Ned's face on it. Varys the merman swimming in the river behind them, and Lady Stoneheart like flying from a tree or something. It's so stupid.
I'm now scared to see any kind of concept art of Ned's of freaking what's his face's head on top of an eagle. Like, oh god,
can we make that the Wednesday in Westeros season 7 like podcast album cover?
Not only can he warg, but he can sort of like, half morph the head, but he's not good at it. So it's just like, it's like the head and maybe a toe on the foot is like a human toe, and like the rest.
This is what I want. I'm telling you, let's just have a whole podcast that's just our spin-off ideas. Because here's what I want to pitch: Lady Stoneheart is back. That's in my pitch. And she uses her magic to bring back the rest of the Starks, except they have to come back in the way that they died. So she has a big gash on her neck. She has to sew Ned's head onto an eagle because he warged into that eagle, but his head got chopped off. So she sews that on. But Rob, he comes back with the wolf's head.
And his real head is just out there. Like some peasant has collected his real head. And it's just like bodied on a shelf somewhere, like just uttering like just various things like, I think, it's like, wait, how can you talk? You don't have lungs. Well, it's just, that would be the best thing of all. It's like after the end of all this, we find out that Lady Stoneheart is the true villain of this entire show. And it's really, if we had just gone back and killed Catelyn Stark properly the first time, all of this could have been avoided. But no,
thank you for reminding me. Maybe this is a good summary note, is that when we were talking in the fan theories episode, especially about the Azor Ahai and could it be Daenerys, and also the just the ship of Jon plus Daenerys. There's a thing we've brought up before, or maybe at least I've pushed it, is that this whole thing takes on a different perspective when you start to think about Daenerys being the villain of Westeros,
Yeah.
And I still think there's a chance of that. And I don't think it in a conspiracy theory sort of way of like, let me put all the clues together. But I think they're there, is she daughter of the Mad King or niece or
she's
something?
Daughter. No, she's daughter.
Because
remember, Jon Snow's her nephew.
Her insistence through like 4 seasons of how she was born to rule the 7 kingdoms is so ridiculous and far-fetched. And like, especially when I rewatch it, I remember all the irritation I felt with her constantly claiming about how her people would welcome her and stuff. I'm like, bitch, nobody knows who the fuck you are. Everyone thinks you're dead. I don't like, that's so aggravating to me that she, that her character was not humbled that way. And I think the only reason she wouldn't be humbled is because she's a fucking psychopath.
Mm-hmm.
And, and she comes in with this horde, this Dothraki horde that literally all they know is like raping and killing. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I just think she's a I don't know in the alignment chart if she's a chaotic good or like a chaotic evil or something. She's over there on the chaos end. I think. I do not think she is lawful. She is not a lawful.
Okay, so let's look at just the constraints of time that we have. There are 2 seasons left. We still have to basically battle Cersei, who is, pretty clearly set up as like the current big bad. That's not, the north of the wall. I would imagine it's going to take all of the season to at least half of the season to deal with her. If the real villain is the Night King and all of everything north of the wall, if that's the real, true, ultimate threat, do we really want to take the time to go and like be like, well, Dany's actually the secret big bad, and she's because she doesn't have to be defeated before we deal with the White Walkers, I would hope, unless they somehow give us this weird thing where it's like Daenerys is invading, like she's as equal of a threat as the White Walkers. So then the people of Westeros have to band together to fight both of them. And the real Song of Ice and Fire is these 2 opposing forces bearing down on Westeros. Who will win? Like maybe that, and maybe that's the way they go. And I can see some
no, I'll
that,
clarify.
But,
I don't think she's going to be the big bad, but I think there's a real possibility that she is an agent of chaos, that when she hits Westeros, stuff goes badly in a way that we are not expecting. Like I don't think she hits as a conquering army and is like hailed as a champion. I think stuff gets ugly.
Well, or it's just,
I don't know though, because definitely in the show they have done in even starting in season 4 when she's conquering the slave cities, they're definitely building her up into the liberator, and the, leader role. But just watching seasons 2 and 3 again, I'm like so frustrated all over again with her just
but it's her arc, right? Her arc is to try to figure out how to be not like her brother or her father.
True, but we've never humbled. There's no part of her that's ever like humbled, I feel. And maybe that's what's coming in the books, because in the books, she's still fucking lost out in the middle of nowhere. The Dothraki horde hasn't even picked her up.
But don't you think that whole Dothraki picking her up is a little more like, she was the conqueror of Meereen. And then I feel like the only reason she was sent out to the wilderness is to just give us one more of those. Whether or not you bought into it is another thing. But why have her, flee Meereen, be dropped in the wilderness, picked up and basically molested by a Dothraki horde? What's the point of that if not to knock her down a few pegs one last time before she has to go across? And again, she wasn't there very long. She sort of, had another like triumphant Dany moment, walking out of the fire and everything. It may have, and maybe that just served to embolden her even more. I mean, I don't know. I would hope that they play with that, so even if Jon, forges an alliance with her, maybe he's like, man, I don't know if I should trust her. Like, I like that there is still some uncertainty, even though she's there and they're like, hey, we're all going to team up to face the White Walkers. Like, I like that there's like, some rogue element still involved. Like, man, I don't know if we should trust her, even though Tyrion's there. Because keep this in mind, Tyrion has now pledged his loyalty to her. Tyrion and Jon are, they go back, they have a relationship. They sort of trust each other. So there's all these other people surrounding her that are like, can vouch for her. Like, hey man, we've been through it with her. She's good. She's up to the task. Like, she's all good. So I just like that there's still, and maybe it's one of those things where after they beat the White Walkers, there's another episode or two that is like in Lord of the Rings, after they beat Sauron, they go back to the Shire, and it's not in the movies, but it's in the book, where there's this scourging of the Shire. And it's like Frodo's last sort of like, you think that, they beat they beat Sauron, everything's cool, but they go back to the Shire and they have to basically kick out, because in the book, in the time that they were away, Saruman has sent his forces to occupy the Shire. And you see in the movie, they do a little flash forward when he's looking into the pool, Galadriel's pool. He sees like the Shire basically like, turned into this like industrial like wasteland. That actually does happen in the book. And then Frodo and his friends have to conquer that, basically, get the Shire back all on their own. I think the whole point of that scene is, you may think like, well, why after a climactic battle would they throw that in? And it's like the last thing Frodo has to do to prove that he has, he's grown up. He's become the, sort of the wise warrior that, Gandalf always kind of thought he could be. And I wonder if we're not going to have that, like after they beat the White Walkers, like if they beat the White Walkers in like the final, like in the episode 4 of next year or episode 5, and you're like, wait, there's still one episode to go. Like, what are they going to do? Maybe that final thing is like the madness of Daenerys, like finally has to be dealt with. Either she has to confront it, or something, maybe there's like a Hunger Games moment where they're all sitting around a table, like, okay, who's going to be in charge here? Because right now it's pretty hard to tell. Like, there's so many alliances and like, betrayals and blood rights, and like, and Gendry walks in and they're like, oh god damn it, now you're here too. All right, so now we've got to deal with all this. Who's it going to be? Just figuring that out. It'd be so awesome. It's going to be so awesome if Gendry ends up ruling the whole thing at the end of the day. Like the dude that is just like, I was just a blacksmith. I had no idea who my dad was. I didn't give a shit. I was out on a boat for 4 years, and you want me to be king? All right, I guess. That just, I would love that if somehow. One more thing. Jim Broadbent has been cast as Marwyn, the Grand Maester of Old Town. So Jim Broadbent, not Michael Gambon. That? Jim Broadbent has been around. Okay, let me see. He's been around for
James.
No, Jim Broadbent. He was Harold Ziedler in Moulin Rouge. Gotcha. He was in Cloud Atlas as like 7 different characters. He was also for Harry Potter fans. He was the I forget his character name, but he was the original potions master. He's kind of like the cowardly Slytherin guy who's sort of I forget his name. But anyway, please. I love him because he is the only actor in the world who can modulate his voice convincingly. Like half of his characters are like, oh, I'm up here. And then half of his characters, he can be down here. And you buy it either way. Like you don't know what his real speaking voice actually is, which is kind of fun.
So we have to meet some new character. Damn.
Yep. But he's gonna be the guy, the dude at Old Town that's like, Sam, you need to know. I mean, it's all gonna be Captain Exposition stuff, right? And none of it's gonna be. If they try to give us some kind of like, oh, Gilly and Sam's relationship, like who gives a shit? Like, I'm gonna know time's being wasted if we see anything more than Sam. Like, she can be there like fishing books out of the shelves for him, but that's all we need to see of Gilly ever again. Does not matter.
Yeah.
No, I've rambled on way too long.
No. I want to throw in my other crazy chaos theory, which is that if we're talking about I don't think there's any possibility of this, but when we were talking about Azor Ahai last week, when I rewatched, I was like, I wonder if Podrick could be. There's no clues for Podrick being Azor Ahai, but I think Podrick may do something badass.
Oh, I think that's guaranteed.
Podrick, Gendry, I don't know. There's just there's some stuff there where I think there's some like secret competence to him, but I don't know. Maybe not. Anyway, you ended on a strong note. I weakened it. I'm sorry for mentioning Podrick, but let's do the plugs and get out of here because we have rambled for a long time.
We originally thought this was going to be a short one, and it's kind of turned into.
I know. I was like, I can't talk about Game of Thrones today. There's only this one bit of news. All right, where can people find us and talk Game of Thrones with us?
Yeah, so we're online at findusthere.org. That's our official website, findusthere.org. You can also get us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest. All of them, find us there. Look for that username, find us there on all those networks. And definitely, if you're on Twitter, hit us up. If you're on Facebook, join in the discussion. We want to hear, if you hate everything we said, let us know. If you're like, no, I love that thing that Todd said, like, let us know that too. We want to get into it with you off episode.
Yeah, we have in years past, like I've hosted Game of Thrones comment discussions on my blog, but we really want to move that to Facebook and Twitter, where our handle is Find Us There. So find us there with that handle, Find Us There on either of those platforms. And every week we just want to have host a Game of Thrones discussion. Yeah, and you can find this podcast everywhere that great podcasts are found: Stitcher and iTunes and Google Play and Pocket Casts, and I think we're on Podbay. I don't know, but on SoundCloud too. I think that's probably it. And we will try to do maybe one more preview episode, and then we're just going to jump into the season. So until then, 7 blessings to you, Taylor.
And Azor Ahai to you.